and Clyde. We got two little Staffordshire Terriers rolling around.
I need to share my music.
I hear something. There it is. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Veterans Breakfast Club for Monday, June 6th. 3rd. I'm ahead of myself. Today's June 3rd. This is the Scuttlebutt for Monday night. Welcome, everybody. This is the VBC. For those of you joining us for the first time, we are a nonprofit in Western PA. Our mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. With me, as always, is my co-host, Todd DiPastino. Todd, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm in Missoula, Montana. I just saw my niece graduate Hellgate High School. So congratulations, Sophia DiPastino. And I'm visiting my brother and his family.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I see some familiar faces. Mark Spiritigliosi, it's great to see you again. Ida May, I'm seeing some faces I haven't seen in a while. It's good to see you all. Ed Cottrell, Julia, great to see you. Jim Roberts, Dave Seaver. Oh, excellent. Great group tonight. We have
Beth Reuschel, who is
Beth.
doing, I think she's still on a research trip in St. Louis. Yeah, man, she's made some cool discoveries at the National Archives.
Beth, we will get to you because we want to hear some updates. Oh, we have to. That's some good stories there. And we have two great guests joining us as well for our open conversation. We have Jon Malik and we have Clint Jordan both joining us to share a bit of their stories and a bit of the projects that they have going on, both big and bigger, I guess. We'll get right into it. First of all, we're going to just thank you all for being here. You are the reason that we exist, VBC, and we have you to thank for it. These programs that we are able to produce week in and week out all exist due to your support. And you can check out our website, veteransbreakfastclub.org, if you'd like to donate to the VBC and help us, as we say in the nonprofit world, keep the lights on. Todd, you seem like you have something to say.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned. I see Dave Seaver and it looks like he's in a hospital room. Is he in a hospital room or is he just very relaxed?
You're just very relaxed, Dave.
Okay, good. All right. I'm no longer.
Put our minds at ease, Dave.
Todd, I actually had back surgery back at the beginning of May, and then about a week and a half later, I wound up with a post-op infection.
Oh gosh.
So yeah, so I'm at home. I'm in bed. I now have this wonderful PICC line in my arm for 6 weeks of IV antibiotics. So, but I'm getting better.
Oh boy. What a way to spend your early retirement from the Air Force there, Dave.
Yeah, no kidding.
I know the nurse is treating you as well as you treated everybody else.
That's right.
So far, so good.
That's good.
But yeah, that's why I haven't been on for the last few weeks. And tonight I finally felt like, staying up and being on the program. So here I am.
Well, excellent. Thanks for joining us. And if you need some caffeine, just pump it into your veins and stick with us for all of the great stuff we have coming up. John, I want to jump right in with you. We have some exciting things to talk about with you, not least of which is your really awesome podcast, Headlines and History. But let's get a bit of your background first, because the podcast is excellent, but your service is pretty awesome too. When did you join?
Oh, well, first, thanks for having me tonight. I really appreciate that, Sean. So I joined in 1997. That was the year that I graduated high school. I joined in May of 97, so just a month before graduation, and I've been in ever since. So when I say I joined the Army National Guard, and joined as a young intelligence analyst. Back then we called it a 96 Bravo, an all-source intelligence analyst, and joined as a private E1, and here I am today as a CW-4, and spent all of my time in the intelligence world since that day.
What got you into intelligence?
Well, it was just intriguing. I was interested in law enforcement when I was young, and I thought that there was a connection between law enforcement and intelligence. I wasn't interested in being an MP, like a gate guard and standing and checking licenses, so wanted something a little more cerebral. Plus, I had some family members that were in the intelligence field in the Army as well. My uncle was in, my cousin was in as well. So I kind of followed in their footsteps, and it was boy, it was a great choice. I'm glad that I did. I've enjoyed it every minute of it.
So straight Army, you were never gonna even flirted with Navy or Marine Corps?
No. Yeah, it's funny that my my father actually came home one night. I was sitting at the kitchen table before I joined anything, and an active duty Compo 1 Marine Corps recruiter was sitting at my kitchen table, and as soon as my dad walked in, he said, "You got to go." So there wasn't even an option when I wasn't gonna be a Marine, that's for sure. But my family members were both Army, and so I went the Army route. And I don't like heights, so Air Force is out, right? And I'm glad that I did, really, because I have a passion for the Army in the sense that you can't win wars unless you own the ground, and so and that's what the Army does. So,
did you have an interest in history going into the Army? Was that something that you sort of developed over the course of your career?
I did. I was a regular history fan, I guess, like a traditional high school kid might be, and I love sports and I love history. Those are the two things I really cared about. And so I just kind of grew that draw to history kind of grew as I got into the military. And obviously, when you're doing military intelligence work, not only are you worried about the tactical fight and what's happening in front of you, but also in order to understand the battle space, you really need to understand its foundation, and you need to understand why you are where you are. And that really began with my first deployment to Iraq in 2005, and then grew in Afghanistan in 2012, and then even further in 2020 when I was in Kuwait. So it's almost like every time that I go down range, I found like it almost reignites my passion for knowing more and more about the past. And as you might imagine, I have a particular interest in the Middle East because that's where I've spent 4 years of my life.
A lot of people that I've talked to that served over there said it was like being in the cradle of humanity was just very, what was that like for you?
Yeah, so that's exactly what it's like. Particularly, I had that feeling when I was in Iraq. Afghanistan was a little different, although it has the civilizations, the age of the civilizations. But when you're talking about the land of two rivers, right, Mesopotamia and everything that started, as we understand it, right, the original civilizations coming from Iraq and Iran and that part of the world, it really was like thinking it doesn't get any older than this, right? This is kind of like where it started, if you will. And obviously there was some challenges with us there in 2005, and we had a mission and it was dangerous and all those things. But when I had an opportunity to just take a break and think about it, it really was pretty fascinating.
So you were in for about 8 years before your first deployment?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I first joined, my recruiter looked at me and said, you're in the Army National Guard and you're in what we would call a Tier 5 unit. That's the language they used back then. And she's like, you're not going anywhere. Don't worry about it. Just you're going to join and they're going to pay for college and you'll be fine. And I think then, like anything else, and it happened to all of us, the towers fell on 9/11 and the world changed. And that was the case for the National Guard. And so the National Guard transformed from what you would understand it to be in the 80s and the 90s into, the ultimate professional fighting force that it is today, when we were called upon to support Compo 1 active duty when they were rotating out of Iraq in both Afghanistan and Iraq. It may not have been the case if we just stayed in Afghanistan and we didn't go into Iraq in March of 2003. But once we did, it really put a pressure on, the 12 infantry divisions that we have in the Army. And so they called the National Guard, and we were actually one of the few, the 42nd ID Rainbow Division here in New York. The original Chief of Staff being Douglas MacArthur, for a little history there. They chose us over other National Guard divisions across the country to hold down the fort, if you will. And so we rotated in 2005 with the 1st Infantry Division and took the battle space from them. And then when we were replaced by the 101st Screaming Eagles afterwards. So it was active duty, then National Guard, and then back to active duty. And it's pretty proud for us Rainbow soldiers to have the ability to say that.
Did you have to be retrained as that transition happened? And was there a reason why your unit was selected?
No, we weren't retrained. I mean, all of the training that the National Guard receives is the same as active duty receives. We go to the same schools, we do the same things. I mean, there are some options for Guard schools that are a little shorter, a little more compact to try to fit with the reality of the fact that Guard soldiers have, civilian careers as well. But generally speaking, all of the training is exactly the same. So we didn't need to be retrained on an individual soldier level, but there was some learning in terms of the command level, right? So we had a couple of extra what we call command post exercises. We spent some good time at Fort Drum prior to us leaving, that being the closest active duty post, and worked very closely with the 10th Mountain folks, just to make sure that, again, from a staffing process and from a command process, that us Guard folks were ready to go. And they even, as a matter of fact, active duty sent a full bird colonel with us. Our chief of staff for the division was an active duty chief of staff from the 82nd. So they did take one of the senior level officers and interject him into our National Guard staff, just to make sure that, we were tracking, and if we needed any support from that senior staff level, that we had that experience from that component. So no different training per se.
Was there a point in that first deployment that was a reality check for you? Like, since you kind of went in not thinking you were going to be deployed 9/11, like you said, and then you're out there.
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, other than what would be maybe an obvious answer, and that is when you take your helicopter flight from Kuwait and you land into Crete, which is where we were. That was the division headquarters, was in Saladin province into Crete, and you land and you start looking around, and it doesn't really hit you when you're in Kuwait, even though Kuwait is a very different place than the United States in a lot of ways. But it still doesn't. It just doesn't hit you when you're there. It hits you when you get to Iraq. But it didn't really hit, I would say, until our first what we called VBIED, so vehicle borne improvised explosive device. And we had this really, thankfully in this event nobody was injured, but in where I was, we were in one of Saddam's palaces on a compound that he had built for his mother. And the room that we were working in, which is called the ACE, it was our intelligence room. It's a tactical SCIF, so a sensitive compartmented information facility. It's only for intel folks and anybody who has certain clearances like the CG and other things. But anyways, we had a satellite truck that was sitting outside of the building the room that we were in, and it had this massive door that would sometimes took 2 soldiers to open. It was this really heavy metal door. And early on in the deployment, we had experienced one of those detonations right over the Tigris River, which was where the outside of our palace was. And the explosion concussion from that VBIED into one of the buildings blew that door open as if it was like a swing door with like a screen on it. So at that point, all of us younger Joes kind of looked at each other like, oh, this is a legit deal here.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we don't have enough time to really get into the whole of your experience and the whole of your service, but I know that seemed like there was something very interesting you talked about in the green room with militias, and I feel like this is almost a Jeopardy question, Todd. I don't know if you formulate it. Can you formulate it on the fly?
Yeah. I can. I could formulate it. Okay, I think I can. There are 16. You could tell I'm making this up. I just learned all this from John a few minutes ago. There are 12 states that have state militias. These are not National Guard. These are state, authority-driven militias. There are 2 states with naval militias. These are Navy units that are run by the states. One of them is New York State. What is the other?
Anybody? Brad Washabaugh.
Brad Washabaugh. Does he know this?
No one knows this.
I would say Florida.
Good guess.
Yeah.
Good guess. Not correct.
I'm so glad you're wrong, Brad. I'm so glad you're wrong.
Anyone else?
Is anybody else? Oh, Bob McCormick. You don't know this, Bob. Oh, we can't hear you. We can't hear you, Bob.
We'll have Jim Roberts then.
Oh, I see Rick guessed Virginia. No.
I'll say Texas.
Nope.
No. It's bizarre.
Anybody else?
I think we have a hand up. Oh, Chad Riddle. Chad might know, actually.
Maryland.
No, not
No.
Maryland.
Another
Not
good
Maryland.
guess.
It is,
Wait,
Ben
Ben Wright. We'll give Ben Wright one more.
Guarantee Ben will know.
Well, Nebraska's Navy. Everybody in Nebraska's Navy is an admiral. It's an honorary appointment.
It's not Nebraska. It's Ohio. Ohio has a naval state militia, and they have an admiral, and they have, I mean, this has got to be the least known branch of military service in the country. So that's just our little factoid for today.
So how did you come about this information of a naval militia, John? I'm intrigued by this.
Oh, so, as my full-time job outside of, what I do on the podcast, I'm still in the Army, and I'm still employed full-time as a full-time National Guard soldier. And I'm the Director of Intelligence and Security for the New York National Guard. So I am the Adjutant General's J2. And so I'm responsible for intelligence and security related stuff for all of our Army folks, our Air folks, and then our state militias. And so we have a New York Guard, we call them, and those are, Army state militia folks. They wear the same exact uniform that we wear with the same camouflage pattern, except instead of U.S. Army, it says New York State. And the Navy folks do the same thing. They wear the same Navy camouflage uniform, except it says New York State as well. And they are a naval militia team. I think there's 300 or 400 in the state, and they have 3 boats that they're very, very proud of. As I was talking about earlier, I was just in a meeting today, as I said earlier, with the Adjutant General and his staff. Once a month, we get together with everybody who's on his staff, to include the state militia folks. And the Admiral was able to brief that all 3 of his boats were fully operational, and he was exceptionally excited about that. So it's a big day for the New York Naval Militia when all 3 of their boats are up and running. But out of curiosity, if you are curious, that their mission is really to patrol the Hudson. That's number one what they do, and they help to support with ice dam identification. And if the Adjutant General needs to go somewhere on the water, whatever it is, they can travel between Albany, where we're located, or down into New York City. So it's not a lot of folks, but we have them, and they're a proud team.
And they're official. I mean, being a civilian myself, these guys are official, and they're part of they are contracted by the U.S. military or the U.S. government to support.
Nope. Not the federal government. So this is state only, right? So in the National Guard, you have, when we are in actually we can be in 3 statuses. It gets a little complicated, but generally speaking, the National Guard is either in a Title 32 status, which means we are working for the governor. The governor is our commander in chief, and 99% of the time that's the status we're in. Or we're in a Title 10 status, which means that we've been federalized and we now work for the president. And obviously we'll go on Title 10 status anytime we go overseas, we deploy, or, right now we have New York National Guard folks that are down in Texas that are supporting the Southern Border Mission. They are on Title 10 orders. They've been federalized, and they're supporting that mission down there. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you heard, but just a couple of weeks ago, we lost a helicopter down in Texas, and that was 2 New York warrant officer pilots. It was a tough day. But anyway, so that's Title 10. The state active duty folks are not in either one of those, because they have no connection to the federal government whatsoever. They are paid for by the governor. They work for the governor. Like I said, they wear New York State uniforms, and at no time ever would they be federalized to go work anywhere else. They don't go to National Guard training. They don't go to basic training. They don't do anything. Everything is within the state.
So interesting, fascinating. Okay, so let's dive into headlines. You've been following headlines for how long in your current job?
Oh, well, I mean, just to stay on top of it, stay on top of what I do, I'd really have to say since the day that I joined, right? But most importantly, or I say most acutely, would be the last 2 years. That's when I came on board, when the Adjutant General hired me as the full-time Director of Intelligence for the New York National Guard, rather. So it's really been a responsibility to be as up on the foreign affairs landscape as I can, and that's both in a open source and unclassified environment, but also the classified environment. I have to be able to provide the boss with information that he can use to make critical decisions on his forces. And so, so I walk that fine line between whether the boss wants to know whether it's, newspaper information or whether this is really, intelligence gathered overseas and we have access to here.
So diving into your podcast, Headlines in History, how did this idea start and why did you decide that, this was sort of a passion project?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because when I was downrange, I was in Kuwait in 2020 with the 42nd ID. So the entire division command staff was deployed in support of something called Operation Spartan Shield, and that's based out of Kuwait. And that's kind of a military mill-to-mill relationship mission. We have soldiers in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Jordan and other places where we are reassuring partners and ensuring that we just reassure them that we are partners and we're here to help. Anyways, and so my soldiers and I came up with an idea because it's not a dynamic mission, the OSS mission in Kuwait. It's more of a strategic mission. So it doesn't move as quickly as, say, Operation Inherent Resolve, which is the Iraq mission. And we came up with an idea to present to the commanding general one day out of the week to present his intelligence summary, classified intelligence summary in podcast format. The CG only spent a couple of hours in the office on Sundays, and no one had ever done a classified podcast in the Army before. We actually checked that out. And I asked our division chief of staff, and I said, who was kind of an open-minded guy at the time, and I said, hey, sir, I got an idea. Why don't we do this? Instead of presenting the boss with a paper, let's present him with a podcast on a classified network, and we'll figure out all the logistics, and we'll let the boss listen to his update on Sunday. And he thought it was a good idea, and we did that, and we did it the entire time we were in Kuwait. So I say all that because that was the impetus to start doing something when I came back home. And I haven't been doing it all that long. Right now, I'm about 3 or 4 months in, but it's something that I've been thinking about ever since we returned from that mission in 2020. So I kind of dipped my toes in it with my soldiers in the classified realm a few years ago, and now I've decided to kind of take that passion with me here and doing it on the home front.
So can you give us I pulled up some of the episodes here: Blinken in China, potential Hamas ceasefire, NATO turns 75, ISIS in Moscow. How do you select your topics? What are you diving into per episode? Is it all current events?
Yeah, so right now I'm focusing on the current events, foreign affairs, military conflict sphere, right? And I'm in all the work that I'm doing during the week for my agent in general. I'm looking at what might be the most consequential, at least in my mind, foreign affairs topic of the week. And then what I do is I'll discuss a little bit about what happened in that event. I try to get into it a little bit more specifically than you would find in a 3 or 4 or 5 minute news clip, right? And I'll add some of my experience on top of what I'm discussing to provide some context and things like that. But because of the history, what I do is then the second half of the show is I like to give a historical understanding of why that issue that's happening that day is important. Or where it comes from foundationally. So, and the reason for that is to me, there's a space between what people are learning about in the current events world and then those, those lovers of history that'll read 5 books on one tiny topic because they want to know everything about it. But there are people there. You there?
Glenn, our host for Thursday nights, Glenn, is like that. He'll read 1,700 books on one minutia.
Yeah. And there's one, and those people are fantastic. And I'm that way in little ways, but anyways, but there's a space for people that want the middle, right? They want to know a little bit more than the 5 minutes the nightly news says, but they don't want to be a historian, but they'd like a 20-minute, 25-minute conversation to know what's going on. So for example, in my latest episode, I talked about the helicopter crash where the president of Iran died as he was returning from a meeting on the border with Azerbaijan. And so we discussed a little bit about what we think that means or I discussed a little bit what we think that means for Iran going forward in the near term, in the next 6 to 12 months, based on what I know is going on in the region. But then I discussed the history of the president himself and why President Raisi was even elected, if you could use that language for Iran, but why he was even elected, why he was there, and who may replace him, why he would be replaced, why he was chosen specifically by the Ayatollah to replace the Ayatollah once he passes. Right now, he's 85 years old. He doesn't have many years left, you would think. So anyway, so using the history, using the context, using the experience, I try to merge those two things and talk about what's important today, and then give you the background, and it's been fun.
I liken this to, I recently watched the series on Netflix called Turning Point, the bomb in the Cold War, and was fascinated by it. I didn't know that much history about Russia, and they kept on, they almost in the same idea. They talked a lot about what was going on in Ukraine, and then would flash back and bring us through every decade of what was going on between the US and Russia, and in, you know, NATO and the Warsaw Pact, and how everything sort of became the way it is. And had no idea, as sort of just, you know, a layman looking into this the first time, about that history. So I could see how an audience would pick up on this and want to know more, like you say, about each one of these little bits that you're diving into and giving much more facts about.
Yeah, sure. So a historian would know, right? So as an example, again, you know, I was discussing in the latest episode the transition and why we were in a position where there was a revolution in '79. So, you know, because most people will know the Ayatollah came in, there's something happened in the late '70s. They might know because we had the hostage crisis for a little while before President Reagan came in. But if you're not somebody that's really interested in the region, you wouldn't probably know about Operation Ajax, which happened in 1953 with the US and the UK. MI5 and CIA went in and ripped out, that's not the best way to say it, but we pulled out President Mohammad Mossadegh for a lot of Cold War reasons, right after the Korean War and right after World War II. And we were, the US and the UK were responsible. We've already come out and admitted this in the last few years, so this isn't anything that should be surprising. But anyways, which led to the whole Shah's performance after 53, and then the Shah being pulled out in '79 with the revolution. So, you know, it's those pieces of information that somebody that, again, that might be interested but isn't the historian, wouldn't know about why we are where we are today. So
that's kind of your hope with the podcast as it moves forward, is just providing that for anybody. It doesn't have to be military. It can be, you know, non-military, anybody who's interested in the history of current events that are happening.
Yeah. And then, you know, I have the, you know, the military experience and the context, so I can get a little bit into, you know, when I'm discussing Ukraine and Russia, for example, and we're talking about how President Biden just recently decided that he was going to allow some US weapons to be used against Russia, potentially inside Russia in certain areas, and what those weapons are, the ATACMS, why we would want to use them, what kind of targets they would go after, what makes the ATACMS different than anything else, or why is the MQ-9 Reaper, which is a RPA platform that the Air Force flies, you know, why are the Houthis able to shoot that down so regularly, and why have they now had, I think, a total of 5 now? I'm going to talk a little bit about, I mean, I've been involved in operations downrange as an intelligence officer utilizing the MQ-9 Reaper. I'm not flying it, right? But as an intelligence officer, I'm using the intelligence that the MQ-9 provides and advising the commander on where we think the MQ-9 should fly. And so anyways, I just have some of that experience and can provide more context to that. Lastly, I am getting into having some interviews with individuals that have really a lot more experience in a particular area. For example, in the next couple of weeks, I'll be interviewing a really fascinating lady that lives in Jerusalem. And I talked to her just yesterday about what it's like to be in Jerusalem today, what it was like on October 7th, what it was like on the 13th when Iran responded. She lives literally across the street from the Knesset. So, and she could provide some really obviously on the ground perspective about what it's like to be living in Israel in this time, literally when they're at war. And so have some of those individuals on as well to help out.
Excellent. I put the link to your podcast, Headlines in History, here in the chat. We just checked it out on the screen share.
Thanks,
so
Sean.
everyone here, please click over to that and give it a listen. You know, when you're driving into work or you're walking on the treadmill, or Dave Sieber, you have no excuse. So download some episodes.
There you go.
And John, is this only you working on this, or do you have a team?
No, this is me. Yep. This is, you know, you can ask my wife. Yep. It's just me. And, no, I talk to colleagues at work and they help me. I work with some really smart intel professionals and stuff. So, you know, it's, I guess I would say from a ideological standpoint, maybe, you know, I have a lot of people that can help me with topics and discussions and really flesh out what I'm thinking. But really from a production standpoint, it's some guy in his basement really talking into a computer and editing and going forward. So, yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear that.
Yeah.
Todd, before we move on, I wanted to see if you had any questions for Jonathan. Or if anybody else here has any questions, you could just raise your hand or put it in the chat here.
Yeah, please do raise your hand and ask a question if you want. You could let us know. Well, I do look forward to keeping up with the podcast there, John.
Yeah, Todd, I appreciate it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And please be sure to join us, John, anytime. Or if you have a new podcast coming out that you would like to highlight, jump in with us, let us know about it, and we'll be sure to get the word out.
Great. Appreciate it. Thanks, Sean.
And hang out with us here as we continue to go through our open conversation night. And if anybody has any topics, I know Dawn Nemchek, you sent us some stuff. We'll get to some of the headlines that you had, Dawn, in just a few minutes. But I'd like to pop over to Clint now. Clint Jordan, our next guest. And let me see if I can find him. I just saw him just a minute ago. There he is. Clint, you traded your beautiful outdoor background for the indoors.
I did. I was nervous the dogs would get out there and start barking. So they tend to do that if I jump on a call.
Yeah. Clint, you're coming to us from Colorado, beautiful Colorado. But I love to dive into a bit of your Air Force firefighter. And I don't know, Todd, if we've ever had an Air Force firefighter join us before.
We have at our Beaver County breakfast, and it was fascinating. We really, I learned a lot because he was the first Air Force firefighter we'd ever had share a story, and man, it was fascinating, and the equipment was pretty cool too.
Clint, what got you into firefighting for one? Why did you decide to do it in the Air Force? Is it different than us here at home?
No, but at home, when I joined, I was in California, so affirmative action was a real thing. Mm-hmm. So I tried to be a fireman out there and couldn't, based off of that. So I was like, well, the military is not going to affirmative action me. So I went to the Air Force recruiter and said, hey, man, I want to be a fireman. If you can get me in as a fireman, then I'll join up. And I joined a little bit later. I was 23. But like I said, I've been trying to be a fireman in the state, and it just wasn't happening. So I was like, cool, man, I'll just go join the Air Force, travel a bit. And that's what got me to being a fireman in the military. It was just it was not going to happen in the civilian world.
Right. And you were 23. What year was that you joined?
96.
Oh, right around the time John was in.
Yeah, right behind John. Yeah.
Yeah. And how long were you in?
So I did 21 years and 10 months.
Wow. Congrats.
Yeah.
And talk to us a bit about, is the training different for this? I'm trying to figure out the path here because it sounds very rare. We all know that, not many people join the military now, but this sounds like a really, subset of guys who would be very specialized in something.
Yeah, it is, man. When I went in, I was going to be a fireman, but I started as a pararescue dude, and then got a couple weeks into that, and my shins decided they weren't going to handle all the running and everything. So it gave me shin splints, and I was like, thank you, shins. And then I transitioned into the fire department. I think it was a 57 or 60% washout rate back at the time to pass through the fire academy. So the difference between us and them or a civilian department is if you have at the airport, you have airport firefighters, that whatever town you're in at that airport, they're a very specific set of firemen that drive big trucks with a lot of water. And then in the city in New York, you got the ones with the big ladders and towers, right? So that's another very specific skill set of a fireman that is a ladder truck operator. There's hazmat people in every city. There's rescue. There's all of those things. And in the fire department or in the Air Force, we are all of those. So we get trained specific, in every single one of those categories. So you are an airplane fireman. You are a hazmat guy. You are a rescue tech. If you go through the schools, you are a truck driver at some point. So the jack of all trades, that's the fireman in the Air Force. Is just you're not stuck to one little, one thing as you are in a city. So it's quite a bit different. The training is very robust.
And I've talked with several friends of mine who were training to be firefighters years ago. But is this the same idea? You go to a building that they can set on fire, and you work on all of the techniques on how to put it out, carrying people up and down stairs, things like that.
Yeah, so that setup's the exact same. Like I said, if you're going to be your firefighter 1 and firefighter 2 training is exactly the same in Air Force. It's the same criteria. It's the same carrying big old dummies and running up and down ladders with 70 pounds of gear on. And yeah, so that stuff is all the same. Like I said, once you go through being an Air Force or an airport fireman, and that's your training is done, right? For us, it just continues. I was 17 years in, and I went to another class, an officer class. learn how to be a fire chief, so our training just never stops. It's pretty, I think, common in all of the military. There's just different levels that you can just continue to train and get better at what you do. But yeah, as far as the physical side of it, it's the exact same stuff.
Were you like deployed, or were you sent to, where were you sent to? What air base?
Yeah, so I was, when John was spitting off dates and times and wars and all stuff, I'm like, how's this guy remember this stuff? And then he said he was an intelligence dude. I'm like, that makes sense. I can't remember any of it, right? And I'm like, man, we joined the same time. So as he's going through his thing, I'm like, no, that was there. I was like, yep, I did Afghan. I'm looking up Fob Shank and all these places to see if they were. So I joined in 96 and then deployed the end of 97 to Saudi, right? There was Prince Sultan Air Base, and then there was another one that was really, really nice by the side of it. And my order said I was going to this one. And I remember I got there, it was just a fresh, young E1 or 2. And I roll up and I got my bags and I know that I'm going to live in these little huts while everybody else is in tents. And I pull up and the fire department shows up. They're like, all right, man, come on with us, Airman Jordan. And I'm like, no, I'm supposed to be going over to Riyadh. And they said, no, you're staying here, dude. And I'm like, no, my orders right here says Riyadh. That's where I'm supposed to be going. And like I say, where this hutch is and everybody, 8 people in one little hutch. So I didn't make it to Riyadh, needless to say. So we tented it up in Saudi. And then again, in 2001, we got there at like September 9th. So we deployed the 9th and then the 11th happened. I was, I guess, lucky in a sense that I was very healthy throughout my entire career. So it lent to, once people got to the E6, E7 rank, they got a little bit less healthy oftentimes. So when they got hit for deployments, they couldn't go, right? So they're medical things. Well, Clint was always relatively healthy. So my back half of my career was just, we were gone, man. We started doing in 2010 or 2011, the fire department in the Air Force was starting to go over to Afghanistan and Iraq and supporting Army FOBs and then Marine FOBs and all that other stuff. So they put something in place. It was really weird. For most of our career, you're very safe behind a big base, right? We have our planes, so they're very, very protected. You didn't really have to worry about a lot of things. And then when we started setting up all these FOBs, they started getting too many people there. So there was like over 500 people or 1 or 2 helicopters. I forget what the criteria was, but whenever that FOB got to that level, then they sent in Air Force firefighters to help protect that asset. So they called us a QRF force. And the first time, we don't learn how to shoot all the guns and stuff. We do our M16 training every once in a while. And I remember I got picked up as an E7 and they said, hey man, you're going to go on this QRF thing. And you got a team of 10 firemen. So we get to Saudi first, load up all of our gear, all the guns, all this stuff. And there's 10 Air Force dudes. And we're just like, no clue what we're about to get into, right? We didn't really, they just said, hey man, you're going to Fob Shank, this place in Afghanistan. You guys are going to get there and establish all these things. And I'm like, yeah, cool. So we get on the plane and we stopped somewhere else, picked up a bunch of Army cats that were just like for a day or two of R&R. So these guys were fired up, man. They were ready. They're ready to rock and roll. We have 10 of us sitting and we've got our guns and we were going into Shank and I'd never been on a 130 that's fully loaded in the nighttime, ready to do its thing. And I remember everything just shut down and we're coming in and all you hear is just crack, crack. All the Army guys are just racking, right? And my guys are looking at me like, hey chief, what? I'm like, rack, dude, do what they're doing. Right. So we land, the tail comes down, these Army guys boogie, and then we kind of scurry out the back of the plane. What in the heck where are we? And what did we just get? It was the craziest, scariest moment of anything. And we got into Shank and we stayed there for 6, 7, 8 weeks. And
so due to their, hold on, I'm just thinking this scenario, due to their sort of readiness, did you think you were walking right into a firefight?
Oh, 100%, man. These guys, I once we got below whatever level it was and they darked everything out, I was like, holy shit, something's happening here. My guy's like, hey, dude, we didn't do that in the Air Force. Like I said, for 10, 12 years, we deployed to very safe places. So yeah, I 100% thought we were jumping out into something. And when we got out, they were gone, man. Every other 30-something Army dudes that were on that plane, they were gone.
John, did you ever leave an Air Force man behind? You just ran out of the plane? No.
They did, John. They did.
No. They probably did. It's funny. There's actually they should have grabbed their Air Force brethren with them, but that is actually SOP, right? So when you They call it a combat landing, when he was discussing when you're in a C-130, right? They shut all the lights off because you don't want any of the surface to air to be able to see you. And then they do a quick spiral to get out of the sky as quickly as possible. First of all, if you've never experienced it, give it a go. It sucks. But anyways, then as soon as you hit the ground, you boogie, right? Because you're a target and you have 30 Joes that are compacted into one 5 square area coming off the back of a plane. And so as soon as you can get out of there, you get out of Dodge, because, one mortar round comes in and now you lost 8 dudes instead of just 1 or whatever. So what the Army guys should have done is told the Air Force folks that, hey, this is what we're going to do. Follow us. And,
they gave us zero heads up, dude.
Yeah, not good.
Zero heads up. I remember, I swear to God, man, they got out off the plane. And like it did it was almost like the 130 skidded out. You know what I mean? It was that fast.
Yeah.
Like John said, they come down to this thing. We landed and they did this hard skirt. All the Army guys went out the back. And then we got out at some point. We look around and everybody's gone, man. And I was like,
yeah, not good.
No, there's some bunkers. I remember just telling my guys, hey, find some bunkers. There's supposed to be one Air Force guy that's going to come out here and meet us, and he finally did an hour or so later. But that deployment turned into something special, because I said we were there for 8 weeks, I think. And then what we did for the next 6-7 months was just hop to different FOBs and establish little fire departments and set up things. So that was my first real trip where we were like, this is cool, man. We went up to Conduce, which wasn't the safest place in the world. And then we were with over at Maymana with some Norwegians. It was like a recovery base. So it was really cool for about 8 months of us just hopping around.
That's kind of what a question I want to get to, but I unmuted Ben Wright as well, because Ben Wright, pilot. Ben, you flew some of those you did some of those landings, correct?
Well, what he was describing is a random steep approach. You come in at a fairly high altitude, 10, 12,000 feet, where you're above most ground fire. And then the idea of spiraling down was it was an unpredictable pattern, and then just show up on final and land. And then they'd offload, and then they're gone again.
Yeah, they were gone that fast too. Like as fast as we got off, that plane was out.
Yeah.
Well,
combat offload, they may have never quit taxiing, just turned around, took off.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. Literally, it was like we were just getting out as he was looping around, and off he went.
And Clint, I was having a great time watching Ben's reaction as you were telling that story. Ben you could tell that he had been there.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy for a couple Air Force firemen, that's for sure.
Well,
I'll tell you really quick if you don't. I'll tell you quick,
ahead,
Sean, if you don't mind. No one ever explained the combat landing to me when I went into Iraq in 05, right? So I'm sitting on the back of the C-130, my back's to the wall. We don't sit sitting forward, right? You're sitting against the wall, and I'm just looking out. I could see one of the windows, and it's just over my left shoulder, and I'm like, all right, I think we're getting close, right? Because we flew from Kuwait up. Anyways, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the plane just boom, just turns, and I'm like, I grab my buddy and I'm like, I had no idea what's happening. I think the whole thing's going down, and he's yelling at me. He's like, no, it's a combat landing. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, why did somebody warn me? And down we go. Yeah, it was nuts.
Ben, did anybody ever approach you afterwards and be like, I'm going to box you out for doing that to me? Like,
no. It's exciting to watch firemen. I used to exercise with them, for all the, in case you had a aircraft crash on base and stuff, and go out and play on-scene commander. And it was interesting. And actually, the Air Force training school at Goodfellow Air Force Base at San Angelo is pretty interesting. I'm sure Clint went there. And it is interesting now, after Clint's time, as part of Air Force basic training, they learn how to be infantrymen, because the reality is Air Force people can wind up anywhere.
And Clint, what was that like? I mean, like you said, you weren't really trained on a lot of this weaponry, but you're going into these really dangerous places. And what was your job at each one of these FOBs?
So I was literally to set up the fire protection to protect their aircraft.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there's one, there's a lot of guys. It was pretty silly. I mean, some of our guys got themselves in some situations they probably shouldn't have, because they wanted awards and decks. And so they're like jumping on convoys when we were never trained to do that stuff. When I went down, I told all my guys, I'm like, look, if any one of you guys are trying to get some kind of medal and go on a convoy, that's not on my watch, man, because we don't do, we weren't trained to do that. I couldn't lead them to do that. So yeah, it was kind of weird at first, and then you get settled in, and just like anything else, there's bombs going off all around you, and that's pretty nerve-wracking at first. And then you just settle like everybody else does. Hold on a second. Clyde. And so yeah, it's kind of weird because we were never trained to do that.
Now, during this time, I mean, you were in for quite a while at this point. Had you already fought a fire at this point? Was there anything that I'm sure a lot of it is fire prevention, but was there ever an incident where you had to put one out?
Yeah, man. So I got I don't know if you call it lucky, but the Air Force, the military period is pretty safe, right? Our buildings are all brick for the most part, and like so, there's a lot of fire prevention. Everything is set up to not be disabled. You're not going to do much to it. My first assignment was Guam, and Guam is surrounded by it's like a 2-foot fuel line, right? So they come in, the tankers come drop fuel, and then they supply the island through this big pipe thing that goes around it. And the airport coming in is set up, and they're coming in the ocean, and then at the top of that is that fuel line coming in, right? So the ILS system was down, which helps them kind of guide and gear. I think Ben could probably tell us a little bit more about what that ILS is, but it was off, so the pilot didn't see. He came in and just clipped the front of the fuel line and took that airframe and dumped it down. There's 240 something people on it, so he hit it, nose went down, it went into the side of a mountain, the cockpit flew off, and then the whole thing kind of accordioned. So we got out there like 3 a.m. and a lot of dead folks and the fire. And so we had some opportunities to do some to do our job, which a lot of firemen in the Air Force don't. And we're really good at, like I said, prevention is good. And there's a lot of small things that go on. But to that level, like we had a couple buildings burn down and stuff, but something like that was just incredible to be a part of that young and that early in the military. It was brutal to see too, man, because you pulled up on scene, and as you're coming in, you're like, holy shit. Like he could have 6 inches higher in that nose, and he would have cleared the fuel line and landed perfectly. Like that was it. That much, like he hit it and then.
Justin Miller, you raise your hand.
Yeah, Clint, when I was in 66, 67, I was a brand new shaved tail second lieutenant at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, waiting for flight school. And they sent me down to the airport to quote unquote fight aircraft fires for 2 weeks. How much progression was there in the development of the protection gear? Because that silver suit I wore was like a hot dog wrapper at the state fair.
Did you have the big helmet? Did you have the super big helmets?
Yeah, the super big helmet.
Yeah, so they've come quite a ways. It's still silver because that kind of fire burns a little bit hotter than, let's say, a structural fire. But yeah, they've come a long ways from then.
Well, all my firefighters that I work with here in Dallas on different things, I tell the story about I was almost like a hot dog at the State Fair of Texas.
Yeah, there wasn't like, I don't know that you guys fought a lot of fire back then. Like you said, that suit was just really to reflect the heat, right? But it was not fighting fire for too long in that stuff.
Well, they had a practice area out there because we were bringing in C-130s all the time and the big aircraft to take the brand new Chinook units to Vietnam.
Right.
So they had practice drills on fighting a fire, an aircraft fire. And so because I was brand new and the boss said, you need something to do. So here you go. Have fun.
Yeah, we used to take all of our commanders through the training courses. So like at all of our bases, I did 11 years overseas, so I was pretty fortunate in my early part of my career. And then, but every commander that we ever had, we would run them through the fire, like the training tower, and then so we'd suit them up and all that silver stuff too, Justin, and have them be, their little hot dog wrapper thing too. We put them through all of our training as well.
It certainly was an interesting time. When I got in Vietnam, I don't think we ever fought a fire where I was, but it was sort of fun because I got to know the firefighters here in Dallas. And at one time we would do events, and one time the fire station came to pick up the excess food. And one of them was a whole freezer of Oak Farms ice cream treats. They loaded up the engine with it, and an immediate fire call. I think someone was the captain was ordered pissed because they had to clean that engine up for a week.
Yeah,
it all melted. But anyway, thank you for what you do. Firefighters are on top of my list.
No, I appreciate that.
Clint, I know we just sort of scratched the surface here, but love for you to talk a bit about real estate planning. How did you get into it, and what is your business?
Yeah, so we actually do a couple different things here. I own a CrossFit gym in town. When I got out of the military, I was scared about losing the connections and the people, and So I love working out. Me and my wife, big fitness freaks. So we figured, hey, we could build a gym and just bring a bunch of veterans to that. So I never lost that connection. And then with that, I became a realtor. So I was building my gym and giving free memberships to veterans for using us as realtors and all these other things and building that stuff out. And we had a goal since day one was to try to figure out how to fund our gym totally for free for veterans and their families. We doing that through real estate basically. And then about 3 years ago, started realizing that there wasn't a lot of like genuine realtor, like genuine groups of people that are truly veterans and or mil spouses, or people that have kind of lived what we lived in the real estate world. But everybody says they want to help a veteran, and then I'm like, cool, but how? Like, what are you going to do? How do you understand us? Like, you live it. So the easiest way for me to help us was to build an organization. So I built Mil Estate, which is military real estate, which is about 150 agents currently, but we're nationwide. I personally vet and interview each one of our agents. They're all military, active duty veterans or military spouses, 100%. And then the goal with that, Sean, is ultimately just to have an agent that somebody could turn to in any market they need to go to, that they have a veteran or military spouse there to lean into, say, that understands everything that we've gone through, all the VA processes. I remember 2 years ago or something, I got called. I referred a buddy to somebody in Virginia, and my friend called and said, hey man, this realtor's telling me that I need to switch to a conventional loan instead of my VA, or else I won't get a house. And I'm like, dude, fire that person. Like, immediately get rid of that realtor and let me find you somebody else that understands your benefits and your rights of stuff that we've earned. There's a daunting number. Is 13% of our veterans, 13% use their VA benefits to buy houses. That to me was just mind boggling. And it's straight up education. Like, we just didn't know. Like, I retired, I didn't really know it. Had I known it when I was in the military and I was the fire chief and he had the influence to help people. And so I just kind of made it a mission, man, to do everything that we can in our power to help educate and do more for our veteran community. And then, like I said, through the Hero Health Project we launched earlier this year, we'll have our gym open totally for free this year, strictly through real estate transactions that we do. And then we'll build out that gym. And then the goal with that is going into other markets. So then I could go to Tampa, or I can go to LA, or wherever there's a lot of other veterans. We'd fund a Hero Health Project gym. And then we've got a real estate team of veterans, military spouses, and active duty people to, one, help, work the real estate and the referrals. But now we're going to help a bunch of agents in that market do a lot more business, do better in their world and the real estate stuff. And then we'll provide that gym for our veterans that some of us fall off the right path when we get out of the military. I mean, all of us know we've all kind of been it. We've seen our friends do it. So we just want to have something there, say, hey man, that it's not a money thing for us. It's not. Come to the gym and hang out with a bunch of veterans, hang out with your buddies here in the gym, and let's see if we can get some people to veer this way instead of this way. So
any veteran can reach out to you to help get an agent and understand what their benefits are if they're purchasing or selling their house.
100%. And even more than that, if they need any help anywhere. So the cool bit is we've all been there. So if you call me and say, hey, Clint, I need a barber in town that's a veteran, or my car broke down, I'm like, sweet, man, we got you. Right? It becomes so much more than just a transaction with this group, with every other group. Like, hey, I have my certification saying that I know something about the military. All of that was very transactional. So we were doing like what you're doing, getting a group of people together saying, hey man, we're here for you guys for whatever questions you guys have, whatever you need, with a house, with not a house. If you come to Colorado Springs and you have any questions, man, like, I'm here. So that's the Mil Estate Network ultimately. And we get the word out and keep jumping on podcasts like yours and meeting and greeting and just spreading the word about what we're trying to do.
Awesome. Well, I put up the link there in the chat for anybody. If you know someone, or if you yourselves, anybody's looking to sell your home or buy a home, please use the link, connect with Clint and his agents. That'd be great. Clint, appreciate you spending the time with us tonight to talk his good stories. But yeah, please stick around with us if you'd like. We're going to go till 8:30-ish tonight, and we'll keep opening it up here for more conversation. Todd, any questions for Clint before we move on?
Any questions? Any questions? No. I think we're good.
Wait, well, CM Griffies.
Joe Griffies.
Joe Griffies. Hold on, Joe. Trying to unmute you.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hey, very good. Clint and Jonathan and everyone. Great subjects. A couple comments, Clint. Number one, thank you for your service.
Yes, sir.
I think your real estate, I'm sitting on a 2.25 VA loan, and my mortgage company calls me every time it drops a quarter of a point. They do it automatically. There's not a better, probably one of the best things besides college is the GI loan that I wish the VA ran as good as the GI loan and the college does, but I agree with you 1,000% about your gym. We just got done Sunday hosting the military basketball with the undersecretary of the VA and Comcast and DirecTV and CBS, and we had a bunch of vets committing suicide. And our program is to get funding from the VA, which we have already started, for veterans and sports programs to be around other veterans. But I'm trying to convince the VA that it's not only in sports. If you get a bunch of realtors that are veterans together, they can take care of a veteran having a bad day. Yep. Maybe he's close to that line of threatening over intent suicide. Wherever group we can get, we want to make this part of the mental health program at the VA with psychology, psychiatry, yoga, acupuncture, chiropractic care, and vets getting along. So your gym is doing more than letting guys lose weight or women lose weight or get in shape. You're really working on their minds. And I guess I got one last question I got to ask you. Being a fireman, this might not be a right question, and it would bother me if I didn't ask you, Clint, but you went to Iraq, Afghanistan to put out fires. Some of our biggest fires over there were burn pits. Did you ever have to go to a burn pit that was out of hand? And how dangerous are those burn pits for our veterans with respiratory problems? You're a fireman.
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is yeah. I have it's called TBM, tracheal bronchial malaise. Essentially, if you hear me clear my throat a bunch, the back of my throat is no longer rigid. So if I cough, it literally collapses. Right, it's pretty brutal when you get sick. It sounds like I'm 90 years old with COPD and I've been smoking for 400 years, but essentially the back of my throat is just soft now. It was in 2016 was my last deployment to the country of Jordan. There wasn't the burn pits directly where we're at, but certainly close. And then a couple years prior, we're very close. So when I was never involved in a huge fire in them, but yeah, they're not healthy, man. They're yeah. So I've been pretty close to them. I personally, like I said, I deal with this by myself now, and I know a lot of other veterans.
I hope you're signed up with the pack bill. That's it. I just hope you're signed up with the pack bill.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I am.
Thanks for what you do.
Yes, sir. And then Sean, so I did two other things, man, real quick, if I can.
Yeah.
So just because John was on the podcast thing, so we just launched a podcast as well. It's called Warrior Stories. This is an amazing platform. It's 100% just talking to veterans like these guys here about their story. So you're bringing me on, with my story. I'm like, man, this is fantastic. We literally just launched it last month, but reaching out and just telling the stories of everybody that's on this podcast. It's sponsored through Millistate. And then we host it at Mount Carmel Veteran Services Center here in the Springs, it's a fantastic facility, man. They help like 200,000 veterans a year through there. So the podcast is ran through their booth, but 100% highlighting our veterans, you guys, and the heroes that came before us. Unlike John, I wasn't a big history buff growing up. I was into sports and grew up in California, and school wasn't my jam. But now as we get a little bit older, and I'm like, man, it's fascinating to talk to some of the guys like you guys that are on the podcast here. So we have that launch too. We're one show deep, and then
please put that link in the chat for anyone. Yeah,
I will. And then one other really cool thing we're doing, I host a TV show. It's called The American Dream TV. It is about community lifestyle and real estate inside of big cities, right? So inside of every LA has a couple people that host their show, and here in the Springs, and I've been working for the last year to get the guy that owns a company. It's Craig Sewing out of San Diego. So we're now launching the Operation American Dream, which is really, really cool. We're going to take my real estate agents in their market, and then they're going to be TV hosts inside of there, but 100% focusing on the veterans, the bases, everything that's going down inside of their communities in the veteran world. So like me being a host here in Colorado, I always put veterans on my shows anyways, but like as a normal realtor, you just highlight a house or a new restaurant or some of that stuff. So we are taking what they already had and said, hey man, we want to do this with just veteran realtors. So again, we get to help more veteran realtors become, better at what they do in their market. And then again, roll back into you guys and say, hey man, I want to help highlight you and your show and what you guys do inside everybody else's market. So
nice. Well, thank you, Clint. And yeah, I definitely put that link into the chat. Justin, did you have a question before we?
Yeah, Clint, one thing, back to the burn pit question.
Yes, sir.
Were those burn pits mostly medical waste, or were they human waste, garbage, etc.?
In the early days, it was all of it. They just throw everything in it. And then it started cleaning up a little bit, whereas the medical waste towards the end of things. But yeah, when I first joined up in 96, 98 in Saudi, and the 99, 2000, I think is when we were probably around one of the not nicest ones. And that was just everything they were throwing in there and burning it off.
Well, what I remember from the mine in Vietnam, having been tasked to be a shit burner one day because I messed up, I don't remember there being medical waste in the burning piles.
Yeah, at some points, because things got so bad out there. John could probably talk to at least a little bit of it as far as the amount of stuff that was going on downrange, and there was nowhere to get rid of anything. So their easy thing was burn everything off. And then we obviously found it real fast that wasn't the safest or healthiest thing to do.
Yeah, so I was in you mentioned being there. I was in Kandahar for my deployment in 2012 rather, and I lived right next to the poo pond, they called it, which is really, it's literally a massive pond. I can show you pictures of just human waste. It's the problem is there were so many thousands of soldiers and airmen that were living on Kandahar airfield that there's nowhere to put it. You can't bury it, and Afghanistan doesn't have the facilities, even like Iraq did, right, that you could deal with the waste in that way. They just did not have those facilities in Kandahar. They didn't have it in Bagram either. So, which is the main post, if you will, one of the two major ones, Bagram and Kandahar. So, you go to Iraq and you don't necessarily have that same issue because there was civilian infrastructure. Saddam had built some pretty advanced stuff, specifically in Baghdad, that could take care of some of those civil things. But in Afghanistan, really, I mean, once you got outside of Kabul, it was bad. I mean, you're talking about living in the Stone Age. It really was like that. And so there's just not, what are you going to do? You're going to put it on a plane? And you're not surrounded by any water either in Afghanistan. So, it was the least of the crappy decisions, if you will.
Right.
Thank you. Moving on here with our open conversation. Beth, I would like to highlight you and your research right now. Where are you and what are you looking into?
Hi. I'm sorry I've been sidetracked. I'm obsessively saving everything that I scanned today in like 8 different places so that I don't lose them all. So I'm actually in Alton, Illinois. St. Louis is right across the river here. And I have a whole bunch of official military personnel files that I'm getting, trying to get. The only ones that you're usually guaranteed are Navy or Marine Corps, Army Air Corps, Air Force. It's hit or miss because 75 to 80% were burned in the fire in 1973. But the first file that they gave me today, when you go there, if you have a bunch of requests, like I have 24 requests, you just take what they hand you. And the first one they handed me was Julia Parsons file.
How about that?
It was 111 pages, Julia.
Oh my God.
Julia, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
That is so cool, Beth.
Yeah. And they were amazed. I said, "Oh, this is Julia." And they looked at me like crazy. I'm like, "No, she lives in Pittsburgh." They said, "She's living." I said, "Yes, this is her file."
111 pages.
Yeah. So.
Any dirt? Do we have any dirt?
Well, it was interesting, Julia. It looks like there's actually a handwritten letter in there from you to them. Apparently, at one point, they had your discharge date wrong. When you were trying to apply for the Pennsylvania, the compensation bonus, you couldn't do it because they had your paperwork wrong. Shocker. So there's actually a handwritten note from you to that, it's very interesting. There were several recommendations about how bright Julia was for her to get into the program that she went into.
That tracks.
It's really neat. Yeah. Yeah. I spent, I have to get through them quickly. So tonight I'm going to go through everything and read more, but it was really neat, Julia. I'm excited.
Oh, for goodness sake. Do they list who wrote these?
Yeah, it's all actual, official documentation from the service and from your service. So they're all dated and signed from different departments.
And this is the OMPF?
Yes, this is her OMPF. Yes. Yes.
Beth, would you mind if I shared the images of an OMPF that you sent me at 206 pages?
Oh yeah, that was amazing. You never did the Army Air Force one in
just to give people a sense of what these OMPFs can contain. You sent me an email saying that you had that they had come through with an OMPF that was 206 pages. And I'm going to share my screen just so that people can get a sense of what these contain, because it's kind of like just a grab bag of all your military records. So you'll see this is a flyer, an airman in World War II, and Herschel Bogus was his name. And you just scroll through, and it's just all kinds of stuff. I
can't imagine what they would put in there.
So this is what you have to look forward to getting, I guess, Julia, when Beth returns home.
There are no court martials in your file, Julia. I had one today that had a whole bunch of disciplinary actions. Somebody that was held up in 1941 by Border Control in Texas for contraband. That file took me 4 hours to get through today, that gentleman's. But you just never know what you're going to find in a file.
That's so interesting. I can't wait to see it.
I did request yours too, Edwin Cottrell, and yours was in the fire. They did give me about 8 pages or so, but that's not what I'm going for you. I just requested it for the heck of it. I'm going to get your flight records on Wednesday.
Okay, thank you.
And this is a big deal, right, Todd, the flight records for Ed?
Yeah, I will appreciate that very, very much.
So this will recount all your 65 missions, P-47 missions in World War II.
Rebuilding his logbook.
His logbook.
Edwin's flight records, which don't tell you what they did on the mission, but I got unit records from Ed's unit, and I'm able to match up his flight records with the missions on the given dates within these unit records, which are 2,000 pages big. But I have found him several times in there, and I'll match the two up, and then we can recreate his logbook.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Beth.
Two happy customers here, Beth. So just tell us, is there everyone who may not have heard about Reuschel Research? Am I pronouncing that right, Reuschel?
Yeah. You did, yeah.
Yay! Can you tell us just how can someone get in touch with you? And like if John wanted to get his service record, what does he have to do?
John?
Well, our speaker from earlier.
Oh, I'm sorry. So John he would not have an archival record, so I could not get his record. He can go, I'm sure he knows this, go online. It's actually the same building that I'm visiting, but it's a different part of the building, and it's a do not enter part of the building. I can't go in there because it's non-archival records. I can only get OMPFs that are 62 years or older, if somebody has been discharged from service for 62 years or more. But I can get morning reports up to through 1968. Anything past 1968, I have to get permission from the Army or Air Force or whatever.
What about National Guard, like John is? Like, is that different?
National Guard,
I feel like that's state to state. Isn't that correct, John? I've seen,
Nope.
uncle.
So all the federal service is saved federally, right? So there will be certain things that would be saved at the states. For example, when I deployed, right, I got the Iraqi campaign medal. That was a federal medal, so that'll be in my federal file. But then New York State will also award me a New York State service to Iraq. That would be located at the state. So in the Guard, you'd have to go to both places to get everything.
Okay. And I'm actually researching a World War I veteran from the Rainbow Division.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's just a little bit of history there. That's where the name of the division came from. Douglas MacArthur was the first chief of staff of the Rainbow, and he said that the 42nd Infantry Division spread over the United States like a rainbow. So that's why we have the name of that. And you'll see too, when you do your research, that the rainbow used to be a full half rainbow, if you will. That's what the unit patch looked like. And now the rainbow that we wear every day is a quarter rainbow because it was ripped in half as in remembrance of all of the soldiers that we lost in World War I. So the original is full, and now we wear like a half one. Just a little bit of history there.
Huh.
Amazing.
Yep.
Very interesting.
That is, I never knew that. I'm going to throw in here. I know. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Beth.
Our zone. Rich was waving his hand. Rich was waving his hand. I think I did research for Rich today.
Oh, let me find Rich. Rich, let me unmute you. Sorry, I didn't see your hand raised. Can you ask, I asked you to unmute, Rich. Did you see that pop up on your screen?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Today, first of all, thank you for the Christmas and birthday present today. When I opened that email and I saw my Uncle Tony, oh my God.
So young.
Yeah, I was so excited. It was amazing. She's doing research for two of my uncles, and both of them were in from the get-go on World War I. In fact, my uncle Tony was in 1939. He was in the Marines in the Pacific, and they kept him in for the Japan occupation. So he was in for almost 6 years. And my other uncle, Charlie, he started out in 41, February, and he started in fighting Rommel, came up the Italian countryside, ended up in the Battle of the Bulge. And in fact, he was in the 82nd. Yeah, and he was in Korea. I was talking to some people last Veterans Day, and I had casually mentioned that he had 50 jumps. And they all went, 50 jumps. I didn't realize that was an incredible number. So, but thank you for sending that picture. It was such a delight. And I'm going to be sending you a request to do my other uncle who was in the Navy. And the gentleman who was the fireman, he was a fireman on an aircraft carrier when the kamikazes were hitting.
Oh my gosh.
I get three uncles that they were all in at the beginning of World War II, right to the end. And it was just something when she sent me the info, I just couldn't believe it. So thank you. Anyone who is looking to do some research, this lady, she is it. She's the go-to lady. And thank you.
You're welcome, Rich. And there were lots of letters from your grandparents in your Uncle Tony's file, wondering why they hadn't heard from him and that he was supposed to be done with his service in 1943 is what your grandfather was telling them. All these letters, probably about 5 letters from your grandfather.
I remember as a little boy, I would go over to see my grandpa, and he couldn't speak English. Actually, what happened was he was in the Italian cavalry, and he disagreed with Mussolini, so they gave him 2 days to get out of the country. And I'm trying to get this picture from my cousin. There's a magnificent picture of him in the armor and the feathers and everything. And what he would do is he would have all these letters when my mother would come in, and he had the pork pie hat and everything. And he would go over and hand her all the letters, and she would read all the letters that both boys sent her. And it was just, and I remember that as a little boy, and I didn't even know you had the letters. My brother's gonna go wild over this. Again, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Beth. Thank you for the update. And it's great to hear this. Like, you've sort of just been coming in and talking to us about what you're going to be planning to do, but to hear, firsthand accounts of what's being found and, how happy this is making everybody is excellent. It's just
Also,
deals.
fun fact, Beth is the daughter of this guy.
Oh, God.
Rick Reuschel.
This is another Jeopardy question.
Yes.
Oh, my God. Wow.
Rick Reuschel, who pitched
What
for
was
19 years
his
in the Major
baseball
League.
nickname? That's the Jeopardy question.
Oh, I know his nickname. I know his nickname. Don Nemchek, I'm sure, remembers him. Don's a big baseball fan. Here he is on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Yeah, what was his nickname? I think I know it.
Don's here with us. Don, I'll ask you to unmute, see if Don knows.
Okay, I think Rick Reuschel's nickname was Big Daddy.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Big Daddy.
Because he was very well thought of. He was well thought of pitcher. He was an innings eater. And when he was on the mound, you knew you were going to get 6-7 innings of good pitching from him. Unlike what we have today, they pull those kids with 50, 60 pitches. So a lot of respect. I remember him well, Beth. I remember him well.
I have one of those hats. My son-in-law is from Pittsburgh, and I'll go get it.
Well, Ed, waving his hand.
Oh, Ed. Oh, yes, Ed, go ahead and talk. You're unmuted.
Beth, he was my favorite pirate. As I grew up loving the pirates and have followed them for 80 some years. And he was my favorite pirate. And I didn't know he was related to you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You've got to tell him. You've got to tell him he's got a bunch of fans here.
Oh, I'm a big pirate lover. No matter how bad they are, I'm with them. Good or bad, they're my baseball team.
That's awesome.
That's better than most Pittsburghers, myself included.
I grew up
Bob
with.
Flaige.
I grew up watching Pie Traynor and Archie Vaughan and Bill Mazeroski and Roberto and all those guys.
That's awesome.
You won't believe the number of people who asked to buy this hat.
Oh, you have.
I mean, my son-in-law, I think it was about 15 years ago. I was down there and they took me to a Pirates game with his twins.
What's the highest amount you've been offered, Rich?
I think $2,500.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Sell it.
I mean, you got to remember, you're in Red Sox territory. They're between them and the Yankees. They're crazy they're crazy baseball fans, and they see that and they say, "Where did you get that? Where did you get that?"
And Greg Yost, you put it in the chat. Yes, I remember him as being a good hitter, Rick Reuschel, and also fast, a big guy, but he could run. I remember that.
Yeah.
Bob Flaige.
Yes, sir. How are you tonight?
Good. How are you?
Good. I just wanted to say, first of all, I was glad to hear Jonathan's National Guard unit, how proficient they were. My last 18 years in service was with the National Guard, Florida Army National Guard. And I was a probation officer in 72, and I'd given all my parents' numbers, home numbers, and I was getting calls all the time. I needed a vacation. So it turns out one of my wife's coworkers said, well, there's a new National Guard unit opening up, an aviation unit. So I went down and joined in 75 and crewed for 12 years. After they wanted to send me to school after school, and I said, I'm not going to have a job with the state if you keep doing this. So I have to turn it down. So they ended up putting me on the FARP, and I ran the FARP for refueling. Our unit went to Fort Hood 91, 92, and we competed. The first year we went, it was a practice to get our C1 rating. And when we finished, they said, you guys should have gone through this thing. You passed flying colors. So the second year we went, there were 17 units that were out there going for C1. And there were 17 U.S. Army, active armies, and 4 National Guard units. We ended up number 4, which meant 3 active Army units were ahead of us, and 14 active Army units were behind us, plus the 3 National Guard units. Now, we were an attack helicopter battalion with Apaches. So, we, unfortunately, I retired in 93 and they ended up going to Iraq. And I wish I'd stayed in longer, but I definitely would have gone with them. And like I said, the 111th Attack Helicopter Battalion was our, we were attached to the 17th, I think it's the 17th Aviation Brigade. And, that was, I just don't think our units got the publicity and the recognition that we should have. A lot of times they were said, oh, you guys are weekend warriors and whatever. But now those months that we went, or those times we went to Fort Hood, we were there our entire 30 days, not just 2 weeks of luxury and, drinking beer or whatever.
Yeah, I that's a great story. I thank you for your service. I'll give you another quick example. So of what it was like to be in that National Guard environment and not get that respect. When we first showed up in Iraq in 2003, we were replacing, like I said, the 1st Infantry Division, which is a very famed unit. And, they kind of looked at us sideways a little bit and like, oh, these Guard guys, what are they going to do? And, and we even had a challenge in leadership because when we came over with our Guard Division leadership, we did not have any component brigades underneath of us. So we had 2 active duty brigades from the 3rd Infantry Division and 2 other National Guard brigades. And the 2 active duty brigade colonels, the brigade commanders, really struggled with taking orders from a National Guard 2-star when we first got there. And but once things worked out and they realized that we were just as capable, if not more, than the first ID was, at least from a command perspective, we had soldiers that were active duty soldiers attached to us during our rotation that wore the rainbow as a combat patch when they left Iraq because they had such an amazing experience working with the Guard guys. So I love hearing stories like yourself as well that has that experience, knowing that those Guard guys can hang tough with those active duty bubbas in any environment. So that's great. And again,
did you say bubbas?
Yeah, active duty bubbas.
That's just a silly term.
Experiences in the fact that first of all, we had to go up to Camp Drum. When we started with the Apaches, we had to get out of Camp Landing because the rockets were going to go down to Keystone Heights, and so we had to go elsewhere to fire. And so we ended up flying up to Fort Drum on C-5As, and as a result, we were supervised by the Air Force people loading, going up, coming back. They backed off, and we loaded everything ourselves, and no dents or runs, trips or errors, and they were just amazed, how proficient we were at that point.
That's awesome.
Don Nemchek, you go ahead, Tom.
Okay, go ahead. No. Let's go to Don. Let's go to Don Nemchek.
Okay, Don, you had sent me an email. I have a couple of the slides pulled up about it's an anniversary, not necessarily a sort of a solemn anniversary of a collision that happened.
It is a solemn anniversary, Sean. Today in 1969, the USS Frank Evans was leaving the waters of Vietnam in a training mission with an Australian aircraft carrier. And sadly, they collided at 3 a.m. in the morning. And as a result of that collision, 74 sailors were killed and 1 body was recovered. Sadly, that body was actually decapitated. The other 72 sailors are interned at the bottom of the sea. And it's a telling story because the families of those sailors wanted their loved ones' names on the Vietnam Memorial. And what had happened was the ship just concluded fire support for some Marines on the beach, and they were turning back to Subic Bay to get rearmed and get some repairs done. And they entered into a training mission with this Australian aircraft carrier. And the American sailor, who was the officer of the deck, was a young lieutenant. The captain was in his wardroom sleeping at 3 a.m. And sadly, someone zigged when they should have zagged. And the result of 74 deaths. The families wanted the names on the Vietnam Wall, and they never appeared on the Vietnam Wall because of it's not a bureaucratic problem. It was just the fact that the government set an imaginary line saying that if you were 12.3 miles away from Vietnam, then you're no longer in a combat zone, so you're no longer eligible to be considered a fatality of the Vietnam War. And these people, the families of this, lobbied over the years, and it's still a hanging issue. There is an excellent, powerful book written about it. It's called American Boys. And it's a read that's so detailed. The author attends the reunions of these of the ship. Actually, the Australian Navy sends representatives. I believe their reunions are in Nevada. I apologize for stumbling a little bit. We were supposed to have Joe Hoffman with us today. Joe was a crew member earlier on the Frank Evans and has worked tirelessly with the families to get recognition and remember them on this fateful day. But just this day in history type of thing, keep that family and those 74 sailors in our thoughts and prayers today. It's their day that this happened. So if you want to pick up that book, again, it's called American Boys. And it's I have it here, of course, and it's just a good read. It's interesting. It's powerful. Details the stories of the young men and how their families' efforts were to recognize them in this tragic accident that happened at sea in 1969.
Joe Griffies, you put your hand up.
Yes, we've been following this story for about a dozen years. I'm good friends with Louise and Sola. We actually had the casket flag of Pat Corcoran, the youngest. He just turned 19 on the Evans. The Melbourne aircraft carrier cut it in half in the middle of the night. Just a couple fast stats. There were three brothers on that ship, Gary, Gregory, and Kelly Joe. Their mom got in Nome, Nebraska. The mother and father were very poor. They lived in a farmhouse, and they had no phone. So over Walter Cronkite announced that the Frank E. Evans had mass casualties. And the father ran 3 miles to the nearest neighbor that had a phone. And they waited 2 days to see the casualty report. Doug Sage is the youngest brother now. He's a truck driver, and he never goes home. He drives up the coast of the United States into Canada, across Canada, down to California. He goes home a couple times a year, check on the house, and he deals with his. And he said to me, Joe, he was only 4 years old. He said, I was in a playpen, 3 years old, when I heard my mother and father crying on the floor about losing their 3 sons. And he said, Joe, I went from the youngest brother to the onlyest brother in one afternoon. There's a lot of controversy why the names aren't on the wall. Every Secretary of Defense that could make it happen has pushed it off to the next Secretary of Defense. We just got to hope that we get a Secretary of Defense that somebody knows and says, hey, correct this wrong. And true, they were about 100 miles before the DMZ, or the line in the ocean. And that line was only there for one reason. Once you cross that line, they stopped taking taxes out of your pay.
Yeah.
And they said they weren't over in territorial waters of Vietnam. Like Don said, interesting book. Louise traveled for 3 years around the country, visiting and living for 3, 4, 5 days a week with the family. And it's one of the biggest injustices of the Vietnam War. And it's got to be corrected, Don. I agree. Thank you. I didn't mean to go rambling on, but.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Joe. Todd, you were going to go before we went to Don.
Yeah, boy, that's wonderful information, Joe. Thank you very much. I had not heard of these 3 brothers who died on the Frank E. Evans. We all know about the Sullivans, the 5 brothers in World War II. This is comparable in Vietnam.
Todd, they all agreed to be on the ship together. And one other stat, the father, who was the highest enlisted man on the ship, his name will come to me. He didn't want his son to have boots on the ground in Vietnam, so he maneuvered to get him on his son's ship. His son drowned. Lawrence Riley and Lawrence Riley Jr. So there's a lot of casualties about that. We were hoping when the flag was stolen in North Wildwood, Pat Corcoran's casket flag, it would raise attention around the country to like Don said, get their names on the wall. There was a lot of excuses, too many Hispanic names, and they wanted all their names spelled out completely. The families didn't want them separated. They want them all together on the wall. They wanted to do the first name, first initial, middle initial, and the last name. It was unacceptable. To add 74 names, they could do it very easily. Very easily. And it wouldn't be that difficult.
Greg Yost, are you saying, Greg Yost in the chat, that somebody who died on the Forrestal in 1967 in the fire on the USS Forrestal, their names are on the wall?
I don't know. That's a question. I don't know. Are they? And if they were, I mean, clearly an aircraft carrier never got within 12 miles of the shore. I'm asking. I don't know. I would think they should be, but.
Well, the 12 miles of the shore would be that's really close. They're talking about somewhere in the South China Sea that there was a lot more than 12 miles you were in territorial waters of Vietnam.
But the Forrestal, I seriously doubt the Forrestal ever got within 100 miles of Vietnam. Yeah. I'm just thinking, I don't know. But clearly those names should be on the wall. So I don't know.
And I had thought also, like you, Greg, that after the Sullivans, the Navy wouldn't put three brothers on the same ship.
Unless permission.
I think those three brothers came aboard. I think that was the only ones after the Sullivans that did that. And I think there was a reason for it. Again, I apologize for not really having all the details of these questions, but there were some reasons for it. And again, I'm sure that it's detailed in the book, but the three brothers were the next after the Sullivans to have brothers on the ship. And again, it's just a very, very sad story.
Yeah, sure is. Thank you, Don.
You're welcome.
Can I give you some current perspective? I think it's interesting that I can understand from the tax perspective, right? We have the same thing that we deal with when we're deployed today, but you don't have to be in country to be known as supporting the mission that you're supporting, right? So if you can deploy to Kuwait and then support Operation Inherent Resolve, which is in Iraq, and then we can be remembered and then receive medals and campaign medals and stuff for the support of Operation Inherent Resolve, and you don't have to be in Iraq. And the same thing is for Afghanistan. You could be in the Navy and you don't ever actually have to be within Afghanistan. It's about the connection to the mission, not necessarily where you're located. Now, you may have a difference in whether you receive combat pay if you're located within Afghanistan or you're supporting it from afar, but I don't know why they wouldn't say you didn't support the Vietnam War effort, whether you were actually within Vietnam or not. Because you could support Afghanistan from Nevada if you want and still be in support, so it doesn't, that's weird to me as a younger fella, why that would be the way that is. But
John, Sean, that to answer Jonathan's question, the ships were given combat ribbons. All the soldiers on the ship were given Vietnam Veteran Service ribbons. Then they were taken away.
Yeah, that's nonsense.
Then they were taken away.
Yeah,
and it's not about their medals and all. It's about were they Vietnam veterans in territorial water to be able to be put on the Vietnam Wall. And every Mother's Day they add on a dozen names to the Vietnam Wall. People that were neglected or had their names spelt wrong, or people that went to court and fought to get their father or brother on the wall. But this is just it's been a long going over 50-year battle. And Sean, you guys want to do a show? I'm sure I can give you a lot of information to have people on this. And I think it would be a worthwhile show.
I think it would be too. Because it does get into the issue of just what John said of supporting the mission. I asked Larry Googans to unmute because he served in Thailand and he flew missions over North Vietnam during the Vietnam War. But it's a great question, Greg. You just put it here in the chat. Those who served in Guam, those who served in Thailand, those who served in Japan, do they get Vietnam ribbons? Vietnam service medals?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. If I might, now I don't want to get into the debate about the the collision in the ship and they went down, because this is what I was told in discussing that. And again, I'm not supporting this, but at the time they had left Vietnam, and I don't have the details, to go down towards Australia, and they were out of the combat at the time, and they were on a training mission with the Australians. Now, to me, it makes no difference, but I think that also, someone else can find out for sure. I think that's also the reason why they weren't allowed to be on the wall, because at the time they weren't in combat. It's not the 12-mile thing. It's they were taken off in training, and I expect they probably would have gone back. But I don't know those answers, Don. You might know better. But again, we've been through this a lot with some Vietnam veterans years ago, trying to get that done, and that was the reason they said they were in training.
Larry, just to clarify, they left Vietnam on the gun line, supporting the Marines and the Army and the American forces. They went to Subic Bay. They went with 5 other destroyers. They went to pick up ammunition, food. They actually picked up 17 shipmates that needed to be replaced on that ship. And it happened in the South China Sea. And they teamed up with the Melbourne aircraft carrier, 60 other ships, to show a sign of strength to the Chinese, to the Koreans, and to Russia and North Vietnam about the strength of our Navy. And it was an accident at sea where 2 ships went to the right in a collision, and the Evans got cut in half. But they left Vietnam to rearm at Subic Bay, and on the way back to Vietnam, they were given orders to spend a couple of weeks in maneuvers to show a sign of strength to the north of our Navy. So it's read the book, Louise. 99% is accurate.
Don, I'm not debating it. I'm just saying the rationale that the military is saying this, and I think that was the rationale that they weren't in combat. Again, I'm not debating it. I support.
No, you're correct. You're correct. They left combat, and they were on their way back to combat, but they hadn't crossed over that line where they were considered in Vietnam.
But to answer your question, yes, because I flew in country. Nearly, half of the missions were in country.
Okay.
And that's why.
Yeah, that's why you have it. But let's say the ground crew who worked on your plane, do they get a Vietnam Service Medal?
You know what? I don't know.
They certainly should.
I'll find out, but I don't know that.
When I see you on Wednesday morning at our Beaver breakfast, Larry, you better have an answer for me.
Oh my! All right, I got to sign off right now. Then I'm out of here. No, I will see you Wednesday.
All right, good.
Great. By the way, great, Clint. Thanks for all of your. Can I just thank Clint real quick?
Yeah.
Clint, I flew fighters the whole time, and when something happened, I trained with the fire department at the Air Force bases. What they had us do, you sat in the cockpit, canopy closed, and acted like you had passed out or something in a crash. And they would come out, they would get you out of the airplane, and all they told us is don't do anything. I mean, they sit there limp. Now you remember, you're sitting in an airplane that could have had bombs on it, probably would have, but crashed. An ejection seat that can save your life or kill you in an instant. And the firefighters were trained on all of those fighters that are all different, Clint, and I think you know that. They're all different, the ejection seats. But yet they would be able to go up there and get you out of that thing, and they just pick you up and you're out. and not necessarily the nicest, but I tell you what, you were out of there. And Clint, I just want to thank all the firefighters, and Clint, thank you very much. I never got my life saved by you, but I was confident that you would.
Oh, is that great?
Well, Larry, hey, it brings back a whole lot of memories, man. So I'm like 5'6" or 7. So not the tallest dude in the world, but relatively strong. So I was always the guy on that cockpit, Larry, that got to sit up on it, man. We would just grab your guys' harnesses and say, hang tight. Yeah. Or just lifting it. Yeah. So bringing back a lot of good memories, man. So you're very welcome. And thank you for what you guys did too.
Thank you, Clint, for joining us tonight. I know you have to run. Appreciate you and appreciate your time tonight.
Yeah, it's been an absolute honor to be here with you guys. So, yeah, you all made my evening. So thank you guys so much. Thanks for inviting me on.
Thanks, Clint.
Yes, sir.
Nancy, you had your hand up before we end the program tonight?
Yeah, I was just going to comment that I Googled to see if the Forrestal casualties were on the wall, and it appears they are.
And the other thing is, as far as the practicality of adding, I'm sorry, I don't remember the number of people from the ship we were talking about. The practicality is really difficult because there is no room on the wall to put them all together, and they would be scattered throughout the wall by as close to the date as possible, but it would be, I forget how many names, it'd be very hard to do that. And a third thing, I think Todd and Sean, you should have Jim Knotts and Alan, his last name just left me, on the program to talk about the wall and the criteria for it, because they could rattle off everything that you've been asking about the the demarcation line and all that. They could answer it.
Yeah, Jim Knotts. We should. He's been on before, and we should have him on again. Maybe even build, like ask a question about the wall kind of program. I think that's a great idea, Nancy. Thank you.
And Alan, I can't remember his name, but he gives tours about he is very, very, very knowledgeable. I can get that information to you.
Thank you. Please do. Please.
Alan McCabe. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Nancy. And
Sure.
Thank you all for joining us tonight, for taking part. Todd, any parting thoughts tonight?
Any parting thoughts? Yes. I saw, when I arrived in Missoula the other day, I forced my brother to give me a tour of the veteran memorials in Montana, or in the city. And I must have closed it. Okay, well, scrap that. I'll go to that another time. Let's leave with this parting thought from Don Nemchek via Admiral Ernest King, one of the most hated men of World War II. The mark of a great ship handler is never getting into situations that require great ship handling. Let's leave with that bit of wisdom. I think that's a great thought. Thank you very much, Don, for that. I think you're absolutely right. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thank you. And John, thank you so much. Everyone, check out the headlines and history podcast.
I'll see you.